better way to spend my beautiful California sunny day and talking about UFC 296. Obviously, before we get there, we still have two UFCs that we got to worry about before we hop on to UFC 296 in Vegas. So there's the Austin card, which is coming up this weekend on December 2nd. By the way, check out the latest live that I did regarding that particular fight night. I believe it is under the title of Two UFCs and 296, and then I did a breakdown on Canelo Alvarez versus David Benavidez. Also, things about Ian Gary and the storyline that is going on with UFC 296, which is what I am getting to in this current moment of time. Now, UFC 296, I gotta tell you, is extremely exciting. Not just the fight card, but the fight festivities that are going to take place before the actual fight night, which is what? The press conference. I think the press conference is going to be an absolute banger. An absolute banger. Well, first off, you have Colby Covington, who has an absolute loose mouth. Will say absolutely anything. He doesn't care about offending you. And guess what? If there's a low-hanging fruit to attack, i.e. Ian Gary, he's going to go after it, and he already did. He already went after Ian Gary. I don't even want to repeat what Colby Covington said to Ian Gary, but you can look it up. Nonetheless, imagine, amplify that in front of a crowd, where now you're in front of Leon Edwards, a guy who Colby Covington is fighting, yet at the same time is also a guy that kicked you out of his gym. Now look, here's the thing that a lot of people have to understand. People are saying that, well, Ian Gary is a toxic person because he walked out of the gym of Leon Edwards in Renegade. Is it that, or is it really just a simple fact that you're dealing with two guys that have competing interests? It's really as simple as that. And I always try to tie some sort of geopolitical metric into trying to understand mixed martial arts, its business, its conflict, and its storylines. Well, the one way I could really explain that is different countries have different interests, and this is a reason why many of them spy on each other. This is a reason why many of them, let's say, hand out extradition treaties or lack of, and then this is also the reason why some have, let's say, I don't know, a good relationship versus the other one that is a little bit hostile. Or one wants a certain product that the other one has. And in this case, this is really where all of this relates to with Ian Gary and Leon Edwards. Everybody wants to bring up the high horse aspect of it. Oh, well, Ian Gary is an arrogant person. He is, you know, a toxic training partner to deal with. Well, I don't know if that's true, because the reality of it is, what's more toxic than somebody trying to take something away from you? That's what Leon Edwards is thinking in his head. And what is more toxic than looking at a man who you want something from, which is Ian Gary in this situation. He wants the welterweight strap, and Leon Edwards has it. It's really as simple as that. I know that sometimes I come up with real extravagant ways to explain things, and it's a bit emotive in the way that, well, I explain these stories, but in this particular case with Ian Gary and Leon Edwards, it's really just as simple as, guess what, man? We're going to fight somewhere down the line. You are really good. I'm really good. I'm right here in the top 10. You are the champion. We are one or two fights away from meeting with each other, especially if both of these guys continue on winning. If Leon Edwards continues to defend his title, especially right after UFC 296. Now, can you imagine, let's say if Ian Gary had an insane knockout where, let's say, it goes viral. And, you know, Vicente Luque is a very violent fighter, if you guys don't know, for those of you that are not hardcore MMA fans. That guy will bring the fight, he will bring the war, and he's going to make it look ugly, sometimes against his own detriment, which, by the way, really sets up a good matchup for Ian Gary in order for him to go out and target practice. In other words, you're going to see the prowess and the striking ability of Ian Gary at the highest level. And somewhere in that fight, you're going to have to see grappling exchanges, which, in my opinion, believe it or not, I actually favor Ian Gary to be able to handle those exchanges over Vicente Luque. So he's the much crisp striker. He's probably the better grappler. And by the way, everybody always says, well, this guy is better than this guy when it comes to grappling because of X, Y, and Z, the resume that he has going on. I got to tell you, the one thing that I found out about grappling in MMA, and not necessarily grappling in just pure wrestling, because the guy who is the top dog is always going to win, whether it's in jiu-jitsu or wrestling. You can't get away from that. But when it comes to MMA wrestling, it is just like every aspect of MMA in and of itself. It's very unpredictable, and you don't know who's going to have the better of what exchanges in terms of the grappling that's going to be involved in the upcoming match of whatever athletes we are analyzing. So, my theory and my prediction is that I think Ian Gary is just going to have a better wrestling in that aspect. But of course, we're not here to just talk about the kicks and the punches and the technical aspects of it, because I can do that as well. You came here to talk about the sensationalized stories that are going on. So we have Colby Covington now taking on Leon Edwards, and yet Leon Edwards is not even concentrating on Colby Covington. He's concentrating on Ian Gary and the little scandal they had going on. Ian Gary has a very violent opponent in front of him, which is what Vicente Luque is known for. Okay, he moves forward, he pushes in a forward direction without stopping and throwing punches at you. This is literally the type of fighter Vicente Luque is, almost a modern version of Vanderlei Silva. So this is a very dangerous opponent to deal with. And Ian Gary is not giving any respect or paying any close attention to any of these aspects of Vicente Luque. But not only that, he goes and he slags off Vicente Luque online for performing a baptism. Okay, now, once again, an Irish fighter slagging off somebody based on religious animosity, who is surprised? And by the way, in the live that I had mentioned in the live stream that I did last night, I urge you guys to take a look at that. The two UFCs and two UFC 296 live stream that I did yesterday on the live portion. I mentioned something to the effect of where Sinead O'Connor, as you know, well, actually, I didn't mention this. I was going to mention this, but Sinead O'Connor ripped up a picture of a pope during her performance at Saturday Night Live in the early 90s. And for those of you that don't know, Sinead O'Connor is a famous Irish singer back in the 90s that, well, sung out Conor McGregor in his fight against Chad Mendes. And then later on, obviously, I've said this story multiple times, Conor McGregor goes after Sinead O'Connor. Actually, Sinead O'Connor goes after Conor McGregor for making anti-religious remarks towards Islam in the Khabib fight. And to Conor's credit, he goes and he says, well, listen, this is the fight game. Don't confuse reality from the fight game, which goes all in line with Conor even saying to Khabib during that fight, hey, it's just business. But speaking of business, that's what they are expecting at UFC 296. They are expected to sell the business. Because you look at Ian Gary, I think he absolutely gets what is going on. A part of me believes he sort of is playing a character, maybe in a way of embracing being a bad guy. Because let's face it, he can't be a Conor McGregor if you're a babyface good guy. And by the way, if you've ever seen Ian Gary enter the UFC, it's the way that they perceived him. He looked at him as like, wow, you know what? This kid is very soft-spoken, very well-mannered, very polite. Not only that, is very appealing in terms of being young, being lean, okay, and has that swimmer's body type. And on top of that, he's Irish. who is connected to Conor McGregor in some kind of way, even though they don't train together, which, by the way, I think if there's any team that Ian Gary should train with right now, maybe it is Conor McGregor. I mean, I get that it's probably not the most well-diversified gym, and I get what Ian Gary is doing by training at Sanford, by training at Renegade, by training at the gyms down in Florida. I understand exactly what he's doing and what he's trying to do, which is what? He's trying to diversify his skills, which with Conor McGregor, maybe you're not going to get that. And maybe that's the reason why he's not going to train with him. But I tell you what, if he ends up training with him, and he did, by the way, he sparred with him, so in a way, you could say that he does train with him already. But to what capacity? A sparring capacity, that's fine. I've sparred with a lot of guys, by the way, guys that you've probably seen on TV, but I would never dare claim that I train with this guy full time, right? There's a difference between sparring and actually being mates with someone, actually living in the same city as them, waking up every morning training together, and that's not what Ian Gary and Conor McGregor are doing. Perhaps maybe it would do some good for both of them. For sure, it would diversify Conor McGregor a whole lot, getting to see different looks, sharpening up his striking that he already has, improving his wrestling, which, by the way, Ian Gary doesn't have quite a bad grappling on his side, right? So this is what we have going on with UFC 296. You're going to have a bunch of guys talking over each other, just like what happened with the Conor McGregor and the Jeremy Stephens little scuffle that a verbal scuffle they had going on, if you guys remember. If you don't remember, who the is that guy? Remember that? Now, that's a famous bit that Conor McGregor threw at Jeremy Stephens. He's like, yeah, I go and knock people out unconscious. This guy TKOs people. And then Conor responds to him, who the F is that guy? And then everybody laughs at Jeremy Stephens like he's Stephen Urkel committing some sort of mishaps in a comedic way, right? And it was just a perfect timing. Not only that, it was a perfect timing. It was also just the perfect delivery and the perfect wits that Conor McGregor displayed during his prime days. And these guys never fought. Obviously, years later, Jeremy Stephens came back and said something about Conor's mom and this and that, of things I'm not going to repeat. You can look up what Jeremy Stephens said. It's quite disgusting, honestly. But at the same time, no one cared, right? This is just the reality of some things in combat sports. It's like if you don't have a certain pull, if you don't have a certain appeal, or if you don't have a certain fan base, nobody really cares what you have to say. And that's just the harsh reality of it. So, unfortunately, they also never fought. That's another thing. And this is really the main thesis of this whole entire video, is you're going to have a bunch of guys who are not fighting each other, trashing each other all night long. So, I don't know, man. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility of happening. Now, is it going to be entertaining? 100%. I think that it's going to exponentially grow the pay-per-view capabilities that this particular event has. Because originally, yes, it's only going to be Colby Covington and Leon Edwards. Then on top of that, you have Paddy Pimblett and you have Tony Ferguson. These two guys, I got to tell you, they're a bit of a verbal mess. Now, Paddy Pimblett knows exactly what he's saying. The problem is no one understands what he's saying. Tony Ferguson, we know exactly what he's saying because he has great, perfect articulation. But at the same time, neither him or us know exactly what he means or what he tries to convey sometimes. This is Tony Ferguson in how he speaks to the media and how he talks behind the camera, behind the microphone. If you remember in the UFC 229 lead-up, he suckered a whole bunch of media members at a scrum, right? He said, hey guys, I want you to say this with me together, right? And then they all say it together, all in the same cadence. I'm here to go and pay it forward. And as the crowd was going like that, you know, the little echoes of multiple people saying it at once, he then goes and interrupts him. He's like, man, yo, lame. Just like that. That's Tony Ferguson in a nutshell. You don't know what he's going to do, and he has very unpredictable patterns in the way that he conveys his message, in the way that he socializes with people. And quite frankly, he's a very awkward and, well, unusual guy in the way that he fights and also in the way that he talks. But I'm curious to see just how Paddy Pimblett is going to attack him on stage if he even chooses to. Now, how about Shavkat Rakhmonov taking on Stephen Wonderboy Thompson? Well, one guy doesn't speak English. The other guy speaks perfect English, but doesn't really use it to a verbal abusive matter in a way that would help prompt up, let's say, a promotion in a fight. And that's just not Stephen Wonderboy Thompson's style. And even if Shavkat Rakhmonov knew how to speak English, I doubt that would be his style as well, because it's just not within his trajectory to do anything like that. So, will Vicente Luque say anything to Ian Garry? That's another thing I want to ask. Because, let's be honest, right? It's a bit off-putting to say horrible things about other people's religious practices. Now, I don't think Ian Garry was slagging off Christians in any kind of way. And by the way, I could segue that particular topic into, let's say, the lack of churchgoers that are happening in Ireland right now. It seems that a Catholic Irish country, all Irish country that's Catholic, okay, is now losing its stand in being religious or showing some sort of respect from it. And you can kind of see that with Ian Garry and Conor McGregor, which, by the way, a lot of the Irish Catholics during the UFC 229 lead-up, they weren't very happy with Conor McGregor slagging off Khabib, even though Khabib shares a different religion with the majority of people of Ireland. Even though some people, well, they will argue that Ireland is slowly becoming a Muslim country, but that's neither here or there. That's a different topic for a different time, maybe even for a different podcast platform. But nonetheless, this is what we have going on for UFC 296 and the possible trash talking that is going to happen, the possibilities of, let's say, even a melee that's going to happen on stage, because let's just be honest, there's a lot of personal things that are being said here. Ian Garry is saying very personal things to Vicente Luque, and by the way, Vicente Luque was never a trash talking type of guy. So this is going to be one of those situations where you see him get lured into, let's say, a bit of a fiasco, in the same way that you saw with Michael, what's that guy's name? Michael Chiesa. Michael Chiesa, and if you remember, Kevin Lee. So Kevin Lee literally brought out the worst character in Michael Chiesa during a press conference. And why I'm telling you guys these classic press conferences is because this is literally what you would probably end up seeing at UFC 296. So what happened with Kevin Lee? He goes and he agitates Michael Chiesa, talks about his mama, and then he says, oh, you know what? Stop talking about my mama. Obviously, I'm a bit exaggerating in the way that I said it, because the way that Kevin Lee conveyed it, he said something to the effect of, yeah, I know your mama watching. I know your mama watching. And then Michael Chiesa's over there. He's like, don't you talk about my mom. Don't you talk about my mom. And then he gets up, and then Kevin Lee's like, what you gonna do? What you gonna do? What you gonna do, ninja? And then he walks up to him. They collide towards each other in a forward motion, and then obviously Kevin Lee gets the first punch of that entire fight, which started in that press conference, and then obviously Kevin Lee went on to beat Michael Chiesa, but that's neither here or there. And then after that, that was literally one of the last big wins of Kevin Lee's career, and then it just went downhill from there. But nonetheless, even with that, it was one of the most memorable press conferences that you can remember out of Kevin Lee and Michael Chiesa. So these are some things that you are going to expect out of UFC 296 press conference. Once again, I hope you guys like and subscribe, enjoy the content, and I'll see you guys soon. Inshallah.